and you could literally see the lump going down in front of your eyes. It was incredible. That really convinced my husband, who'd been a little bit skeptical before, but when you see it for yourself.
I've really seen some incredible stories on that. Homeopathy is something that you can carry around in your pocket.
You know, if you're thinking this is something you want to explore more, you can safely do it at a pace that's right for you as an individual. You don't have to suddenly make all these huge other changes in your prescribed medication, your other supplements, and therefore you can get the feedback from yourself at a pace that's right for you. And I think that's so important in today's world, where we're really trying to help people tune back in with their intuition and take back the power a bit more for their own health.
You can work with headaches, sore throats, earaches, teething pains in babies, sleep problems, period pains. You know, many people come to a point and they're like, that remedy really helped me.
Hello everyone, Catherine here. For some of these episodes where you hear me talking about KindaSound, every 2 weeks, Wednesday evenings, 5:30 p.m. UK time, I'm pretty sure that's right, yeah, I will be interviewing a series of guests on everything to do with animal health, human health, empowering ourselves to live the happiest, longest lives possible. The other thing just to mention is KindaSound Radio. In the interviews, I invite both all my guests to introduce 2 of their favourite songs and explain why they're meaningful to them. Now, on the radio show, KindaSound have a license to play the music, but we're not allowed to do that on YouTube. So in the YouTube versions, the actual music is missing. So please do feel free to play those songs separately and see how you resonate with them. And do check out the links below so that those of you that want to look up KindaSound, they're doing amazing work. They've got fantastic interviewers. All the details for how you can watch and support them on all their platforms are below. Thank you for watching. Well, I am very excited to be welcoming my listeners to the 3rd episode of the Holistic Biologist show on KindaSound Radio with me, your host, Catherine Edwards. Tuning in every fortnight, 5:30 p.m. UK time on Wednesdays. So just a little bit about what you can expect from the Holistic Biologist show. Every episode, I will be having an amazing guest for you. Some of them talking about human holistic health, some of them talking about animal health, and some combining both of it. Because the more we know about the options open to us, the better choices we can make. So these shows are not only fun for you, but they're going to be really educational and leave you with options and different resources that you might not have known about. And for questions to be covered on the show or suggested topics, please do message us. So you can get hold of us on Instagram at KindaSound or on our Telegram group, which is t.me/KS Radio. Or you can always email me at catherineedwardslife17@gmail.com. So today we are going to be having a real treat for you, and we are going to be talking about everything you wanted to know about homeopathy and why this is something we all need to have in our toolkit, really. But before we delve into that, let me introduce you to our wonderful guest today, Caroline Gaskin. Now, I have been lucky enough to know Caroline for probably 10 years now, because we are both holistic health therapists and passionate about all areas of health. But Caroline is one of the UK's leading homeopaths and flower essence prescribers, and is a holistic health coach with over 20 years experience. She specialises in hormonal health and draws on many years' experience working in PR for complementary health, holistic parenting, organic lifestyle, permaculture, and working with sustainable systems. She teaches and lectures extensively and loves to share her unique knowledge. She's also a keen bird watcher, camper, reader, and writer, and loves to spend time with friends and families. So we can see why we've got so much in common, Caroline. Thank you so much for joining us, and how are you doing today?
Thank you. That was a really sweet introduction. It's sometimes nice to be reminded, isn't it, about yourself when you kind of, maybe your head is full of something else a lot of the time. You know, work can be demanding. I'm good. And it's a beautiful day today that we're talking. It's autumn, and, you know, the sun is sparkling on the leaves outside the window, and they are at the yellow phase, which sort of fills the house with light and reminds you of sort of buoyant, joyous things, which is good in dark times.
It certainly is. And I love the fact that you started off on that stage of gratitude, because actually sometimes, it's all in perspective, isn't it? Because some people say we're both in the UK, for those of us listening to us abroad, and some people can see winter coming as a sad time, as a challenging time, and others can see it as something completely different. And I think one of the things I love about your approach so much, Caroline, is one, you've accumulated so much experience, both as a mother and as a holistic health therapist, but also really looking about how the physical, the emotional, the spiritual side of things come together. And that's so relevant to homeopathy. So for those people that aren't familiar with homeopathy, can you just tell us, what is it, Caroline?
It's $1 million question, isn't it? Because you start launching into a lecture unless you're careful. So just sort of draw me up if I blather on too much. Like many women, I personally came into homeopathy at a time of hormonal change. And for me, that was pregnancy. And I feel like women's health issues, and you and I have known this for longer than we've been practitioners, but women's health issues are often not really acknowledged in the kind of Western medicine framework. They're not really studied. I mean, even something as basic as drug trials are not necessarily done on the kind of demographic of women, and women in times of transition, definitely not. So how relevant are modern day medications basically to the individual? And this kind of conversation has been going on for a very long time. And homeopathy was first brought into the world by someone called Samuel Hahnemann, and he noticed the effects of what were then the mainstream medications, and that was things like leaching the blood, so depleting the body of its vital fluid. People were using, and had been using for centuries, been using mercury to eradicate particularly syphilis, which had been around since the 15th century. But he observed that people were using increasingly poisonous substances to try and defeat or diminish health issues. And that what he observed is people were becoming weaker, and that people were becoming, and in fact, one of the very first remedies, or the first remedy that he created homeopathically, was made from cinchona bark, which was being used extensively for malaria. And he saw the negative effects of that when people were taking too much of it, or using it inappropriately. And we could say that about all sorts of things these days. We've got the whole of the 20th and the 21st century as we're advancing into it, which become increasingly more issues around us, even more so in the last 3 years, that are environmental factors that we need to take into consideration when we look at our health. So he started out observing what we are trained in, which is, and you and I very much, to kind of observe how someone's arrived at the state of disease they're in, and then to come up with a health plan for them. And my health plan support happens to also include homeopathy, which is a medication. You do take it like you would take a mainstream medication, usually in the form of pills or maybe drops. But a big distinction to make between homeopathy and other forms of medicine is that it is not material. So when you've got something like herbs, be it Ayurvedic, be it Chinese medicine, being it traditional English herbs, or be it mainstream medicine, or some of our superfoods that you and I met through, these can really influence our health hopefully in a positive way. But what happens often with mainstream medicine is that something else will crop up as a result of taking in that material substance. And so you might affect some kind of change in your original problem, but other stuff's going to crop up. And that can happen with herbs and superfoods and some supplements if you're not careful. And we'll talk about this, I'm sure, as we go along. But the difference is that homeopathy and flower essences are energetic or vibrational medicine. They're not material. So they can be used alongside other choices of medicine, or perhaps instead of, depending on you and your health choices. So that's an important kind of distinction. And so in a way you could put homeopathy and flower essences in the bag of things like breath work, of things like taking a walk in the park and feeling different energetically. Healing can come into that bag, if you like, of solutions. When you've got a material substance like our herbs or our medication or our superfoods, that can block an action in the body, can stop something from happening, or it can force something to happen more. And that can be beneficial. I'm not against that. I certainly employ a lot of those as well. But homeopathy is more energetic. So the body's vital force says, oh, I recognize that state, and works towards health from a different place, if you like, to material substances. So is there anything in there that you want to ask? I can talk about how we make remedies and what we make them from.
Yes, I really do
What
want
sort of
to
things
ask
do
that.
people interested in?
Yeah, because I personally, I am not a qualified homeopath, but I have been using homeopathy since I was a child because my mother has always used homeopathy, mainly with our animals. And my dogs are joining us today and the cats are here because I find animals respond so beautifully to homeopathy because of that energetic resonance. But for those people that might have only heard a little bit about homeopathy and this fact that, oh, it's so dilute that there's nothing else in there. Can you explain that concept to people and how it is made?
Yeah, so we take a substance, and that could be a plant, it could be a mineral, it could possibly be animal derived, and I can talk about that a bit more. And we take a substance, or the pharmacy takes a substance. It's usually done in the pharmacy, and that is diluted many times. And it does take most people some time to get their head around that, and to understand the principle, which is not a new principle, that the more you dilute something, in fact, the more powerful, the more it magnifies the message, if you like, of that. So we take a substance, and a classic example, which is often given, is everybody knows what happens if you're not wearing contact lenses and you chop an onion. Mm. And your eyes start to strain and your nose starts to tickle, and you start to respond to that substance. And so what the homeopath is looking for is a symptom similar state, we call it. So when somebody comes in with hay fever, with streaming eyes and sneezing, and their eyes are painful, with their hay fever, the picture of how hay fever is for them, we will be running through a whole load of remedies that are made from substances that in their material state would create those symptoms in the client. So it could be that somebody else comes in with hay fever and they don't look like they've been peeling onions and chopping onions. They are much more sneezy, for instance, and they're doing kind of big sneezes. And we might ask them as homeopaths, what triggers the hay fever for them? What time of year does it come? And we are always looking for, how is it for you, rather than talking about the disease state itself. So that for me is really resonant. It's much more holistic to say, how is this disease for you? And we can look at a family, not to detract from talking about what homeopathy is, but we can look at a family and say, well, some people in the family got that cold really, really badly. Some people didn't get it at all. Some people got it more with the snots and the sneezes, and other people had more headaches. So we are always, as homeopaths, differentiating and looking at how it is for you. So that person comes in with hay fever, and we're looking for a remedy that, if we were to encounter in its natural state, would create that remedy picture. It is something that can be a little bit complicated to get your head around at first, and it's much better to talk about examples like, how is a cold, or how is a hay fever for you, for instance. And as homeopaths, which you alluded to earlier, we're always looking for the physical in that. And I talked about environment, and what kind of environment influences that person with, say it was hay fever, what time of year it comes, what's causing it. And we call these general symptoms. And we might also say to the client, what makes it better? What makes it worse? You know, is your hay fever necessarily worse indoors or outdoors, because that can surprise you sometimes
Yes.
as a practitioner. You think, oh, it's always going to be worse when I'm outdoors in the park. And that's not necessarily true. Some people will say, I get home and it happens at 10 o'clock when I open my windows to the night air. And you're like, okay, what's going on then? What plant is around? What is causing that problem? And perhaps we're going to use that in dilution to solve the problem. And like I say, that bit can take you a bit of time to get your head around it. And obviously we get a lot of people going, oh, it can't possibly be true. But you delve into quantum science and quantum physics at the moment, and what people have been talking about in the last, sort of 20 to 30 years, 40 years studying much more. And you'll see homeopathy is within quantum, and that we need to be talking about a very different way of looking at the world, less materialistic, more spiritual, more connected to much deeper rhythms than purely what we can see falling, apple falling from tree in front of our face.
I love it. And for anyone listening, I'm a complete convert because I have been using homeopathy my whole life, really. And as in my adult life, I've done more and more self-study, and that self-study has been partly on the scientific side of things, partly on the energetic, and a lot of it on practically trying things out and seeing what's working and learning from real life examples with my two-legged and four-legged family. And I absolutely love it. I can remember one example, Caroline, when my son was only about 3 or 4 years old, and we were on holiday in France in the middle of nowhere. And he was on one of those scooters that you could have, and we were going down a bumpy path, and he fell off the scooter and didn't have a crash helmet on. And typical my son, because he always never did anything by heart, landed on his head and cut his head open really badly. And the biggest lump came up on his forehead. For those of you that are listening and not watching, honestly, it was like an egg on his forehead, but it was also literally spurting blood out. And we were in the middle of nowhere in France. So I managed to put a compression on it, and we carried him. He ran to a local village. Someone said, oh, there's a doctor in there, and he was using homeopathy. Now, he was a normal medical doctor in France, but of course, in other parts of the world, they're much more open to what we here call alternatives. Cut a long story short, he just gave him arnica, which is probably everyone's favorite homeopathic remedy. And you could literally see the lump going down in front of your eyes. No issues, it was incredible. So that really convinced my husband, who'd been a little bit skeptical before. But when you see it for yourself. So let's talk a little bit about, for those people that haven't necessarily experienced with homeopathy, in part 2, we're going to come on about some examples of how they can do that. But talk us through some of the safety considerations, Caroline.
Yeah, definitely. I just wanted to, before that, if it's all right, say a very different holiday story, because I loved that. And we call that the arnica moment, that often we need to experience with complementary health. We need, because we're so immersed in Western medicine, we need that experience, which, we might say it's a conversion, like St. Paul. It's like, something happens and you're like, bam, but actually that moment at which, that aha moment, is really very powerful. And I remember being on holiday with my son when he was about 9, I think, and we were in Tobago, and we went with Dad, and he said he really missed Dad, and I gave him a remedy from my homeopathy kit called Ignatia. That's not echinacea, Ignatia, and that's a remedy for grief and loss and missing somebody. And we sat on the doorstep and talked about the moon, and how the moon was also over Daddy, and he would be looking at the same moon, and he had an Ignatia, and that feeling of homesickness and missing Daddy really dissolved, and he felt much happier and was able to kind of get on with enjoying the holiday after that. So we can use remedies for emotional things as well as physical. And to come back to safety, what is great about homeopathy is that it can be used alongside mainstream medicine choices, that what we don't see is the contraindications that you see with a herb and a drug interaction, for instance, or if you're on really serious medications like blood thinners, which now have become very, very mainstream. Maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago they were only used for heart patients who really were struggling. And now we see blood thinners being used like after C-sections, just to kind of keep your blood in flow. I mean, you're kind of given given a reason without why that's being used, without that being qualified to the individual in front of the medic. So the big difference with what you and I do is we're looking at the person in front of us and how they manifest disease and how they need to be supported into optimum health. Whereas the mainstream medic is just drawing from a list of symptoms and drawing down a medication to match those symptoms, and that is it. And often what they don't say to somebody, for instance, on warfarin or other blood thinners, is you shouldn't be eating grapefruits, you shouldn't be eating garlic, you shouldn't be taking simple supplements like CoQ10 that support your heart and circulatory health. So what we have with homeopathy and flower essences is none of that junk about contraindications that can be an absolute minefield for the prescriber. And what that means is that somebody can safely use these types of medications alongside other stuff, even if they're in a very serious way and are on their way to the hospital, or they're in hospital and we're talking end game stuff. And we can still use those remedies to bring some palliation. If it's somebody who's really dying, we can start to use remedies for fear of death, for easing somebody in, and through those painful moments. And I've really seen some incredible stories on that. I'll never forget giving a remedy called Carbo Veg to an elderly person he had a lot of lung complaints and his breath was really, really difficult. And he's Indian, like many elderly Indian, he just wanted his family around him in those final moments. And that remedy bought him enough time for his children to come from the other side of the world to be with him as he died, and that is a very kind of powerful and wonderful thing to be part of, to be able to support somebody into a gentler death. And that, in that sense, he would have been wired up to all sorts of other things, but he rallied, and how did we know that he rallied? He was given that remedy and he woke up and he said, I would like to go to the toilet. And I know that might sound strange, but he asked to get out of his bed, to go to the toilet, to do a very simple, normal, everyday action that he hadn't been able to do. And I was like, that is his vital force telling us that he's got a bit more strength to be here a bit longer, and that to be part of that is really quite incredible, I think.
It's beautiful. And I really wanted to bring that out with people, because if we've got listeners listening and this isn't something you've explored, we're going to come on more in part 2 about how you can explore it yourself. This is one of the things that I think is so special about homeopathy, because I'm a herbalist. I work with zoopharmacognosy. I work with all sorts of natural remedies. But you can do harm with these if you don't know what you're doing. And the thing I love about homeopathy, and just a couple of other things in my toolkit, is the safety. So people don't have to go all in one or the other. You can, as you've explained so beautifully, Caroline, if you're thinking this is something you want to explore more, you can safely do it at a pace that's right for you as an individual. You don't have to suddenly make all these huge other changes in your prescribed medication, your other supplements, and therefore you can get the feedback from yourself at a pace that's right for you. And I think that's so important in today's world, where we're really trying to help people tune back in with their intuition and take back the power a bit more for their own health.
Yeah. And another thing I think that came to mind while you were talking is that homeopathy is something that you can carry around in your pocket.
Yes.
We're talking about a very small vial of remedies that, can go into a kit that you can take with you on your travels, or you can have with you at home. And in that sense, something I love to say about it that I don't think is talked about enough is that it's portable, it's lightweight, it doesn't cost very much to do. And, people aren't really having the conversation yet about how much the cost, big pharma is costing us. It's costing us lives in terms of research. It's costing us, millions and millions and millions of pounds worth to develop. And yet it has and can have terrible side effects for people. And yet it doesn't often cure. It simply palliates and may create other issues for people. you know, and what we have really when we come back to our natural health toolkit is something that just doesn't rape the planet in the same way.
Yes. It's so important. So we're going to take a little break now. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about how we can have our own kits and how we can start using it for ourselves and our families. So Caroline, I would like you to introduce your first song, please, and tell us a little bit about why you've chosen this song.
Thanks. It's such a fun thing to do. So I actually chose this song for both of us. It's Natural Woman by Carole King. And I just love that ode to something. Obviously, she wrote it to somebody, but that ode to something that allows you to be yourself, particularly as a woman. And it's such a big journey for us. But yeah, I chose that for both of us, really.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Let's all take a break and listen to that. We'll be back soon. Right, welcome back everyone to the Holistic Biologist Show with me, your host, Catherine Edwards, tuning in for change every second Wednesday, 5:30 p.m. UK time. And we are having such a fantastic conversation here with the amazing Caroline, who is a fantastic homeopath as well as holistic therapist in loads of other ways. So in the first section, we've been learning all about what homeopathy is, how's it made, how safe it is. So I wanted to sort of transition a bit, Caroline, to say, right, for those people that haven't started using homeopathy yet, what is a good way for them to start and how can they use it and have kits in their own home?
Yeah, great question. I think a short first aid course is a great way to start. So learning how to use remedies at home and on holiday. And you'll find that many homeopaths offer those themselves, and some of the certainly the UK colleges offer those. And
Is
I
it something you offer, a first aid
yeah,
course?
it is.
Lovely.
Yeah. So I have a video first aid course that is available. I have specialized ones on sort of babies and toddlers, pregnancy and childbirth. And then I also, with the bush flower essences, have like an introduction to bush flower essences. I have one on kids, teens, and pets, which I really enjoyed doing. And I just did them for friends who've got, you know, pets who want to know a bit more, and teens. And then I've got one on some combination flower essences as well. So, you know, there's lots of scope. There's lots of online scope to learn about that, or in person. You know, interestingly, just as a little side note, I mean, coming into the pandemic was amazing because suddenly we were all at home, and the course that had always been traditionally quite difficult to get bums on seats was the homeopathy for first aid one, because it's usually women in the family who are like, I want to learn how to use this for my children so that I've got a resource when somebody's got a fever, I've got a resource when somebody's just beginning to get a cold, etc. And we can talk a little bit about those kind of scenarios. So the idea is that you're using remedies for simple things at home, and the bigger, deeper things in life you're probably going to see a practitioner for. But you can work with headaches, sore throats, earaches, teething pains in babies, sleep problems, period pains. You know, many people come to a point and they're like, that remedy really helped me. So say for period pains, what we're looking at, if a woman has womb pain during her period, we're looking at things like, we start to talk about the generals that I mentioned earlier, the general symptoms. So how is it for you? So the period pain is likely to be in the lower tummy, the womb. And we might be asking questions like, does it extend anywhere? Does it go to your back? Do you get back pain instead of getting period pain? And those kind of questions lead us to particular remedies. So we might have a period pain remedy that presents with more back problems, more back pain. We might have a period pain remedy that is better once the flow starts. So a woman might say, have so much tension before my period. I just want my period to start, because when it started, I'll feel so much better. And you're like, great, I've got your remedy, because that is different to the woman whose period pain starts with a backache. Or it might be that the woman says, I have pains that come and go, or I have pains that are worse at night. And so we are qualifying how that is for a woman, rather than simply saying, okay, that's pain. Let's give you a painkiller. And so all those types of remedies that I've alluded to there, if you're a homeopath listener, you'll know I've alluded to about 4 remedies there. All those remedies are in the first aid kit. So a first aid kit usually has, or I recommend getting a first aid kit that has around 36 to sort of 42 remedies in it. And our main homeopathic pharmacies sell those. And then they come with a little booklet of complaints, and they come with a little booklet of what we call remedy pictures. So each remedy, as I've explained there, has its own kind of pictures, characteristics about how it is for you. And we would be looking at a headache in a similar kind of way. Is it on the left? Is it on the right? Is it over your eyes? Is it throbbing? Do you feel hot or do you feel cold with the headache? Is there anything that you can do that makes the headache feel better? And in fact, we'd ask those questions about the period pain as well. But with a headache, you might be, oh yeah, if I get a cold compress, it feels so much better. Or I need to go and lie down and close my eyes and not look at the light. And so that would lead the homeopath to say, oh, so the headache's worse for the light. And the person says, yeah. And then you'd be like, is it also worse whenever you move? And they're like, oh my God, I can't move. Oh no, I just have to sort of lie still and just breathe gently. And you're like, okay, I've got your remedy, because that person has described how it is for them. So yeah, anything you want to ask about that? Because obviously,
well, I think it's
I've been talking about it forever.
Yeah, one of the things I love it so much about is because all of these things are really, again, it's a knock-on benefit. So not only are they helping to find the right remedy for them as an individual, because it really is individualized medicine, but also, Caroline, it's really helping them to tune in to themselves and learn more about their own body, how it works, what it responds to, which will help them make, moving forward, make different choices. So there's so many benefits of this. Talk us through about how effective homeopathy is for children.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said with the older guy in the first section, what you would be looking for is a response. If you've got a child with a fever, for instance, you're looking for a response which shows you that they're back into the world. So I remember when my daughter had a fever and she was quite spacey with it. And I was beginning to get a bit worried, because it's really important with whatever choices you make that you understand the course of that disease and when to call the doctor. So you want a first aid book, even a first aid homeopathy book that says 999, you need to get to the emergency room. And so what I was looking for was, if a child starts to hallucinate with a fever and really start to space out, we're looking for, is this going into an inflammatory state in the brain? And we need to go and get this fever down in a dramatic way. So she was very spacey, and I gave her a remedy, and she turned to me, she said, Mummy, can I have a drink, please? And I was like, you're back. So if you've got a child with teething pains, for instance, they are in the process of growing a tooth. It is going to come out. It's likely to be painful. It isn't with all kids, but with many kids it is. And so you might find that you give a remedy and they stop crying and they stop tearing, but then an hour later they come back and they're miserable again. And you're like, oh, I think I need to repeat that dose. And so what I like to encourage people to tune into, as we were sort of saying earlier, is the energy, the vital force of that person, and the fact that their symptoms will tell you that you need to repeat that remedy. And we normally, when we're prescribing and giving a remedy, we're trying to match the state that somebody is in. So if somebody's injured, that if they're in an emergency state, then we're going to be matching that with frequent prescribing, and obviously getting them to the hospital as needed. And that's one of the things that I think, I'd like to encourage people to do, is to think about not an either or situation. It's like, you've got a child with a fever, you're giving them a remedy, you're not seeing the response that you want. You can be doing that en route to the hospital. And, there's been a couple of occasions. I remember a friend who'd scalded her face. So she was cooking, and the steam from the cooking scalded her face. And I just happened to arrive at her house, and I had a boot full of antioxidants. I had my remedies, and we had some aloe vera in the house. So we put the aloe vera on the face, gave her antioxidants, gave her remedies. And by the time we got through the emergency room to the doctor, there was nothing for him to see. So sometimes things act really, really fast, even in a first aid situation. And, one of the things that I'm conscious of at the moment is this world trauma, and just this huge amount of stuff that we are going through at the moment, and the way that trauma has visited us massively right into our house since 9/11. And since that time, I've been part of or individually set up trauma clinics for all sorts of traumas that have gone on in the UK, or people who've been visiting the UK have been affected by and experienced. And so to use remedies in that extreme first aid situation to reduce panic, to relieve physical shock and trauma, emotional shock and trauma, you can have a small first aid kit, and it would just be amazing if everybody on the whole planet had a small first aid kit in their house with sort of 10 remedies in for those initial points of trauma to help you get through it. And you mentioned arnica. That is our kind of number one trauma remedy. But sometimes the shock is so profound that we might want to use a remedy like aconite, so that the person sort of gets a breath, catches their breath, and kind of begins to energize the body. And then we might give the arnica. So, an example would be, I remember a friend's son having a bee sting, and he was in such a panic that I gave him aconite first before the normal bee sting remedy, which is apis mel, because it was the panic that was the top layer, if you like. And then he could have the bee sting remedy and start to process that.
That's so important, because also we know a lot now about how trauma is actually stored in the body if it's not released. So actually, that's such an important point, Caroline, that if people can help the body to process and release that trauma and the mind quicker, then it's cutting down also the possibility of longer term issues arising from that event.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, my experience is that we still process stuff. We still go through it if we've been profoundly affected by it. But, a really interesting example that came up over the weekend was a colleague who'd taken a lot of the standard remedies around a cut that she'd had. And I think she's really managed to sort of do something, almost chop off the end of her finger doing the vegetables or whatever she was doing. And she was like, the healing is going really well. The physical healing is going really well. My remedies are working. She said, but I'm having complete horrors about the accident and where that might have gone. And I said, part of that, my reply to her was, part of that is because you're a mum, and you're also, a big part of you knows your level of responsibility, and you're going into the what ifs of, what if that was worse? What if I really did something and I couldn't function because of that responsibility that we hold. And she said, I keep revisiting it in my mind. And so I gave her a deeper acting remedy. So sometimes we give those initial trauma remedies, but for other reasons, it takes us back to previous traumas. And this is what we see in the trauma clinics when we set up the Grenfell clinics. I mean, I'll never forget one man that I must have had 3 conversations with before he revealed that he had actually been watching the Grenfell fire from his bedroom window. And what it brought back to him was a previous trauma. He was Iranian, and he'd been just down the road from a very big fire that happened where lots of women and children died. And he'd also worked on oil rigs. So he'd seen fires on the rigs. And so fire had been a big element. And for that to be reawoken as an old man when he was powerless to help, really went incredibly deep for him. And so we were able to reach back to a much, much earlier trauma, talk about that, give him remedies for what he'd experienced. And that's one of the things that I really love about homeopathy in particular, is it has the capacity to reach back into the past and do some healing, but also it can help people. And this might sound really weird to a listener if you're not tuned into this. And it's obviously taken me years coming from a very analytical science background, but it can help you reach into the future and do some healing for how you show up in the world going forward. And that is really incredible. And that's what I kind of feel we have to offer to the world at the moment, is we can do this differently. We are wired to be able to do this differently. And we just need to gather up some tools that we do have in order to be able to, manifest that.
I love it. Before we move on, can we talk a little bit about, well, there's two things I want to cover before we break. Firstly, is we know at the moment, particularly in teenagers, in young adults, there's a huge amount of anxiety, depression. So have you got any examples you can use about how homeopathy has helped with that? I just wanted to say that today's episode is sponsored by ASEA redox signaling molecules. Now, it comes in two forms, the liquid and the gel, plus there's a huge other product range for us. But why did I start taking ASEA, and why is it now an integral part of something that my whole family, both four-legged and two-legged, take every single day? Plus also something that all the clients I work with, again, four-legged and two-legged, it's number one on my priority list. Well, part of what I do, what I'm passionate about, is understanding the challenges that are affecting each and every one of us in today's modern living. The more you know, the more sometimes you wish you didn't know, but the pollution in the air, in the water, in the food, the control of our minds, the propaganda. But one of the things that we can do is take back responsibility for our own health. Now, every single cell of our body, whether we're an animal, whether we're one of the dogs in the backgrounds or one of my plants, contain these redox signaling molecules. And cellular health and cellular communication is absolutely key, whether you want to get your body back in balance, whether you want to reverse the aging process, whether you want to address any particular challenges that you've got physically, emotionally. It all starts with healthy cells. If your liver cells are healthy, your liver's healthy. If your brain cells are healthy, your brain's healthy. But just like a mobile phone, most of us have got mobile phones that we use on a routine basis now. But that mobile phone, regardless of whether you've got the latest model, is completely useless without a signal. So what does this technology do? The gel is something that you can apply topically over particular areas of concern, whether you want your skin to look better, whether you've got a cellulite, whether you've got an area that's causing you a challenge. The liquid is something you drink each and every day to top up what should be in your cells anyway. But when our bodies are stressed, diseased, challenged, or as we age, we make less of them. So personally, I wouldn't be without it. My sleep's better, my energy levels are better, my mood's better, my mobility's better. If you want to find out more, the details are below. But I'm so grateful that this came into my life, and I'm so grateful I can share it with others. I hope you love it as much as I do. Let me know.
Yeah, definitely. And again, there are, in that kind of like 36, 42 remedies, you'll find remedies for emotional states, for transition, for anxiety, for instance, before exams or driving test. And we have some, again, we slightly qualify it. We're like, how is it for you? And if people say, oh, my stomach's churning, I'll be like, okay, great. Try taking a remedy called arginine before going into the exam, before taking that driving test. It's also a great remedy for people who have a fear of flying. It might be that somebody says, and you ask them another question about flying, and they're like, yeah, I fear I'm going to die. And you're like, okay, maybe try taking aconite then, because that is more symptomatic of that. We could use a remedy like Ignatia that I mentioned earlier for homesickness, for initial grief, for loss, for being kind of a bit overwrought about the whole exam process, and the whole Ignatia's a remedy that tries continually to be perfect. So if you're someone who's always in pursuit of perfection, Ignatia's a wonderful remedy. Another remedy, again, to sort of a great differentiation actually, is what do you do when you are upset about something? Do you want to talk to somebody and you feel better for talking and crying? And then we're like, you need a remedy perhaps called pulsatilla. Or are you somebody who goes, no, nothing's wrong, I'm fine, and goes and weeps in your room away from everybody because you don't want to show people your tears? And that would possibly be a remedy called nat mure. So we're, again, that kind of differentiation. How is it for you? How does that make you feel? Another example of a good remedy to take before exams and trials is gelsemium. And that would be for the people who their bowel goes loose before, and they're just like, oh, let's get a bit of diarrhea before when I'm nervous. You're like, okay, try gelsemium, and I gave that to a friend who had a very tricky job negotiating for people, like people who were on trial. And she said, I always, feel nervous beforehand. And I noticed that my bowel is looser. And that remedy really, really helped her. So she'd use it before going into meetings, So yeah, just to give a few examples. That remedy is gelsemium, by the way.
Love it. Absolutely love it. So there's so much that people can do. Now, what about using with animals? I've used homeopathy for years with animals, so of my family. I find amazing results. Have you got any examples or any words of wisdom for people who want to think about homeopathy for the animals in their home?
Yeah, I've got a friend with 2 French bulldogs, and the difference in their character is so evident. And one of them is she's like a kid who's in the state of, are we there yet? Are we there yet? She just pulls it, that she just on it all the time, and I'm like, she needs a remedy for somebody who's a bit of an overachiever. And the other one, he gets an upset tummy when he eats foods that he shouldn't, but he does like those kind of foods, so he needs more of an upset tummy remedy, and he just gets nux vomica, which is a remedy that some of you might know is like the ultimate remedy for hangovers and for I call it a great remedy for partied out children. And he's like that as a dog. He just loves a good party, and his tummy gets a bit upset if he eats the wrong food. And I think we can all recognize that state, and it's just nice to be able to support him in that. He does take a regular probiotic, because he has that tendency to an upset tummy. But they're just such different dogs to each other, and so they need different remedies, to my mind.
Absolutely. I've used homeopathy really effectively. I can remember my lovely old lab Rocket was out running with the family, not with me. I wasn't running, but he ran over a cattle grid and broke his paw, and they were miles in the middle of nowhere. So by the time we got into the vet, we'd used arnica, but also symphytum, which is one of my favorite. And he healed so quickly. It was absolutely unbelievable. He really did. And touch wood, didn't have any ongoing problems with it. So, again, this is, would you say, well, I'll tell you what, we'll come back after the next break and we will discuss about a bit more practical use of using them and how people can get started, and also a little bit of something for the skeptics as well. So let's take a little break. Introduce us to your second song and tell us a little bit why you've chosen this one.
I chose Savage Daughter by Sarah Hesteros, and I chose it because my daughter introduced me to it. She shared it one day, and I was like, great, I love that fire in it, basically. And I think that as women, we can often suffer from being conditioned by society, and that song is about reclaiming the savage wild woman inside you and just saying, no, I want to do life like this.
I love it. I absolutely love it. So everyone enjoy this, and we will be back after the break. Right, welcome back to the Holistic Biologist Show, where we are having a fantastic time with Caroline Gaskin, talking about everything to do with homeopathy, how we can use it, how effective it can be for the whole family, how we can get started. Now, we wanted in this section, Caroline, to really discuss about this whole issue of complementary medicine versus and how it's poo-pooed a lot in the mainstream. Talk us through, how long has homeopathy been around? And for those people that don't really know this whole history of where complementary medicine, the term, came from and why it's been so almost shadow banned for so long, has come from.
Yeah, I think that's, I had to look up what shadow banning was recently, because I was like, what is that? Do I get shadow banned? Now I understand a bit more. Yeah, so homeopathy, I mentioned about Samuel Hahnemann, homeopathy has been around for around 250 years. So that's actually longer than mainstream medicine. And of course, when we reach back into the herbal realm, we go back, just that kind of communion with plants and asking a plant what its property is and what value it has in nature, what its place is in nature, and what value in our relationship to it as well. So I think there is more and more unfolding of that story, and I see far more interest now than when I first started out in the conversation. People are looking at the value of medicinal mushrooms in our life, of CBD oil, of herbs, spices. Well, is it appropriate for me to take turmeric versus the next person? Do I have the right pathways to digest that? People are asking those questions in the way we might have come at it from a more scientific perspective, but in a way that people have always asked those questions of the natural world. And when we watch our animals, we'll observe that they will walk into a particular field, eat a particular plant for a reason. And I know you work with that, and I find that absolutely fascinating, that an animal instinctively knows. We've lost that instinct. We've become very complex creatures and created a very complex way of living, and are coming back full circle almost. And to come, back to homeopathy's particular story, homeopathy being in and out of the news as quack or not, is nothing new. It's always had that to some extent, and it's very successful, and doesn't require a lot of input in terms of when we look at the consumerist society. So it doesn't uphold the way the world is at the moment. And so in that sense, what happened in 2005, sort of 5 years after I graduated and started my practice, was that the World Health Organization did a survey and discovered that homeopathy was the second most popular health choice in the world. And in that sense, they went after homeopathy. I have heard two different, and I need to go back and find the root of this, but the first was, I have heard people more recently say it was acupuncture that was the first most popular form of health. And we've got to look at, how big China is in that conversation, how big India is in the homeopathic conversation. So in cultures and countries other than the West and England, and North America, we will find that people have a very different attitude, a very different relationship to homeopathy. And even in Europe, mainland Europe, German doctors are taught to use homeopathy. As you said about France, you can walk into a pharmacy and it's readily available. So we have to sometimes take ourselves out of the conversation of little old England into the rest of the world to see what other people are really doing. But that, from that point, 2005 onwards, homeopathy has had something of a persecution in the West. But to my mind, no news is good news. As soon as homeopathy hits the headlines and I share that, or I'm like, oh my goodness, here we go again, I get more clients. Us homeopaths get more interest, because people are like, well, what is this stuff? I want to know about it then. I want to know about this controversy. We love a bit of controversy, and people will dive in and find something which meets the needs for them and their family. And so I never personally find that bad press is a bad thing. But it does make you ask questions, and it does make me ask questions of myself and my practice, and want to share that. So many times I've done political campaigning on the part of homeopathy, gone to my local MP and said, look, these many people in your constituency want this. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to represent us or not? And that obviously is my personal choice to sort of wave that banner, because I see the value that it brings into people's lives, and I think this is, to talk about what we do as complementary is true. As an alternative, has it always been an alternative? No. Learning to breathe properly is not an alternative. It's just something we've forgotten to do because we've smoked for 22 years, 22 years, 21st and 20th century, and bunged a load of chemicals in. That's our problem. So I think what that sort of, brings me on to you is individual choice and standing up for it. Standing up for health choice is something that has been highlighted in the last 3 years. And the other thing that's happened in that time is that people in cultures who are, I think, closer to the pioneer space have said, well, or who have to pay. We don't have to pay for health in the UK in a direct way. We pay for it indirectly through our taxes, but if we're paying them in a direct way, we don't have to go and pay for our healthcare. But in America or Australia, just in some places, and in New Zealand, we don't have the same relationship. And we might, like you, have had parents or grandparents who used some of these old school cures and continue to use them. And so people are beginning to question the value of what they're presented with as medicine and go, do you know what? It's actually not serving me very well. I'm going to go somewhere else. So the listening in the podcast space to homeopathy is just growing. It's huge. And so we're seeing people just go, well, I've got a kit for my family now. This is the best health choice I've ever made, which is incredible and wonderful.
I love it. I'm an iridologist. I work with animals, so I do iridology, herbal medicine, light therapy, etc. And I find it absolutely fantastic that people are going back to asking more questions, because they've realized that the brainwashing approach, quite frankly, a lot, there's a place for all of these things,
yeah.
But a lot of people, it's not serving them, so they're looking for other answers now. So before we close out, do you, as a complementary therapist, I know homeopathy and flower essences are part of the portfolio you offer. What would your message to people be? Because you and I quite often see people or animals that have tried everything else and they'll come to us as a last resort. What message would you like to give to people to try and switch that balance around a bit?
To begin to listen to yourself and what is resonant for you. So if you're listening to this conversation and you're curious, then find out some more. If you're listening to this conversation and you're like, oh, it's all, because obviously there will be some people who are like, oh, it's all hocus pocus. It's like, ask where that judgmental side of yourself comes from. And chances are that you had a parent or you had a schooling system that created a judgmental side of you that is kind of your task to move through in this life. And I'm saying that because I can embody that. I have embodied that in some ways in myself, and I have to work hard with that side of myself that can be quick to judge, and that's okay. I acknowledge that much more now. But if I look at my 18-year-old self, I was far more judgmental. Now I feel like I'm so lucky to have been introduced to and had the opportunity to, I've taken that opportunity, I've taken that step. It is a big step to take sometimes, but it's like, if you've tried a lot of stuff, we could say, what have you got to lose?
Yes.
There are so many resources as well. I think, often people are like, oh, well, these people are charging a lot of money for a consultation. You go to see them for an hour. If money is an issue, then there are lots of lower cost options as well. There are student clinics, fully supervised students. I supervise students on a one-to-one level. There are students in clinics. I started going to a drop-in clinic. I was a young mum. We didn't have a lot of resources. I got into homeopathy because I went to a drop-in clinic that I think cost £10 back in the day, probably costs 25 today, to go and have a short consultation many practitioners in as homeopaths, and I don't know if it's the same for other health professions, but they'll do like a 15-minute clarity call where you can just have a chat and
I
say,
do that. I do that.
yeah, yeah. I think it's a brilliant approach, because then people can go, oh, what is this that you're doing? Like you said, iridology. I mean, I know what iridology is. I'm fascinated by it. It's an incredible eyes of the mirror to the soul, and all that. It's like, wow. But if you don't know what that is, go and get a book, read up on it, do a bit of a YouTube search, and then go and have a clarity call with Catherine, find out a bit more about why would I, like when we look into the eyes, we can see whether someone's taken drugs and which part of the body that is affecting. It's like, wow.
Love it. So just to finish off, Caroline, I've absolutely loved this. I hope the listeners have as well. I love what you said. My call to action would be just open your mind to things. If just having these different things in the toolkit, homeopathy is incredibly affordable, incredibly available, very, very safe, and very, very effective. So I would say, for anyone, and having this as part of your toolkit is an absolute must. So Caroline, how can people contact you? What services do you offer for people?
Well, I have a website, carolinegaskin.co.uk. I work quite a lot with menopause. So I'm on Instagram as _menopause_homeopaths. I'm trying to get it right. And my main focus is courses and workshops. Really, for your audience, it's like a 2-hour workshop, video workshop, getting on my newsletter so you hear about forthcoming workshops. Like I'm going to do a couple in January that are kind of specialist within the menopause conversation, so the thyroid health and coming off HRT. As I said, I do courses and workshops in Australian bush flower essences and introduction to homeopathy. I have a YouTube channel as well, which is Caroline Gaskin Natural Health. I think that's right.
I'll put all your links.
Yeah, in the show notes. I'll just check that one. I think that's what I'm called there. And yeah, I've got loads of short videos on there and always adding to it. So, subscribe there. There's just so much great information out there, honestly.
I love it. Thank you so much for joining us today. I have absolutely loved it. I think these are the type of questions that people are asking now. So I would encourage everyone who's listening to this, you've got absolutely nothing to lose by exploring this in whatever way you resonate with. So thank you so much for tuning in to the Holistic Biologist show with myself, Catherine Edwards, and the fantastic Caroline Gaskin. We're a small team at KindaSound Radio, so we really appreciate you sharing our shows far and wide. And all the links to connect with Caroline will be in the show notes, so please do take advantage of that. If you miss any of the shows, you can check out the kindasound.org/podcast, or look up the Holistic Biologist or the Live, Love, Learn podcast on any of your favorite podcast platforms of choice. Thank you so much, Caroline. I'm sure we'll be back. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. And if you feel inspired, please do share with your friends and family. My goal is to inspire as many people as I can to live their best lives, to stay curious, and to raise their consciousness and that of the collective. So to do this, I need to reach as many people as possible, and this needs your help. If you feel drawn, would you be willing to share your favourite episode with 5 different people? This helps us spread the word and also helps me encourage some exciting new guests to take part in this podcast. If you feel drawn to do that, I will be very, very grateful. All the links and discount codes where applicable for all the products that I support are on my 2 websites, catherineedwards.life and catherineedwardsacademy.com. All of the products are personally tried and tested by me, my family, and my clients. And finally, please do press the follow or subscribe button, depending which platform you're listening on. And above all, stay curious and stay free.